So in my time repairing consoles and handhelds, the thing that I probably saw the most was the DS Lite. Those things were broken constantly. They would always come in with busted up screens or card slots or just something. So I imagine there are a lot of them out there right now that are just busted. Maybe even one you have at your house now that doesn't do anything because it doesn't turn on. But what if you could take it and make it into something pretty cool and actually usable? Maybe turn it into something like a Gameboy Micro. Well, there's a project that's been going on for quite a while now, and it's a really cool thing, I think, to do to turn something that's old and broken into something that could be new for you and fun to have. And that's called a Gameboy Macro. Yeah, we're gonna take a DS Lite and essentially turn it into one of these, just a little larger. And you don't need a lot of supplies or any of that to do it. In fact, I'm gonna try to use as little as possible when it comes to supplies that you would have to order. And for the most part, the soldering iron's out, of course, but you're gonna need some common tools like screwdrivers, obviously. But not much else, actually. And because I've done so many repairs on these systems and have so many parts and busted up systems laying around, I think I have the Well, that's why we have sponsors.
Today's video is sponsored by the command shell from Manji. Protecting your Switch when on the go is extremely important, and finding a good case with solid build quality and extra features can be a headache, but that's where the command shell comes in. This case protects your Switch all the way around while still giving the freedom of removing your Joy-Con controllers on the fly. In fact, the added thickness of the casing on the Joy-Cons make holding them in single Joy-Con play more comfortable. I also like the straps on the back of each Joy-Con so that when you're laying down, holding onto the Switch is actually a lot easier. With the extra large kickstand on the back, dropping the Switch into tabletop mode is very easy, and with the 90-degree cable, you can charge while playing. Currently, Manji is offering a free charging cable and free shipping in the US for the command shell. The command shell is currently retailing for $22.99, and you can check the link below to pick one up. And also, while you're there, make sure you check out their command case with the unique lock and unlock feature as well. Once again, thanks to Manji for sponsoring today's video.
So today's example of a broken DS Lite is this blue one. Now this, of course, is the model where they kind of went to red or blue with the matte black back, and I think this was probably one of the better looking DS Lites. I know there's a lot of colors for the DS Lite, but I really liked either the red or the blue with kind of the matte finish on the bottom rather than the glossy finish. But this one does have a problem, and I thought it'd be a great candidate for turning into a Gameboy Macro. Now, if we take a look at it, you can see the hinge is pretty bad, right? And unfortunately, when you try to power it on, we run into a problem. You can see the bottom screen flashes right here, and the top screen does nothing. Now, what's happening here is the system, when you try to start it up, it runs a self-check. So it tests things before it actually powers on, and that's why you usually have like a minute or two of delay when you go to turn a DS Lite on to when it actually powers on. Now, this one seems to have a problem with the top screen, and that could be a couple of things, but based on the fact that it doesn't even show any signs of life and the fact that the hinge is this bad, that tells me that most likely it is a broken connection with the cable that runs through here. And it has to wind and loop around, and usually there's like a metal guard, a piece of metal in there that actually helps loop it around, and that would end up cutting it at times. So most likely that is our problem. But the good news is, if the bottom is fine, we can turn this into pretty much a fully functioning Game Boy Advanced Micro / I guess Macro, right? It won't play Game Boy or Game Boy Color games, but it'll play Game Boy Advance games perfectly fine with a really nice screen. So we're gonna start by getting this guy apart. Now, I said you will need a few supplies. You will need some way to solder down a resistor, and then you will need a resistor. Now, the resistor that is recommended is a 330 ohm resistor, and there is a full tutorial that's actually set up pretty well on a website that is like literally called like GameBoyMacro.com, and I'll link to that down below if you want to follow some written instructions. Those are the ones that I am actually going to be following for this that I looked into, and it's not bad. It's honestly a pretty quick couple of steps, and for the most part it comes down to just disassembling your DS Lite and then separating the top screen and being able to get the speakers out of that top screen. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, so we have the back off. Something I noticed that was kind of interesting is that the little sticker down here for the water indicator is pink, which may end up being a problem, as this could end up being one that has seen some moisture. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is dead or it's not going to work again, but it could mean that it would be a little more work to get it working, especially since this is also solid pink. It should be like white and dotted, but it's just solid. That means that water got in and around most likely this card slot, which we'll see. The thing with DS Lites is, while the screens were pretty delicate at times, specifically around that hinge, the board itself was pretty solid, I would say. And I do see some very minor signs of corrosion. Now, down here where this card slot is, of course, is one of the openings for the DS Lite, the other one being up here. And you could even say somewhat at the headphone jack charging port as well, but it was fairly well sealed, I would say, but it looks all right. Like, I don't see any obvious real signs of water damage other than just the stickers being pink, so I'm hoping we're okay. So we had our two bumpers that we had to take off of there. Our Wi-Fi antenna actually snakes underneath of this DS Lite card slot, which I know for a lot of people was the biggest pain in the world, because when you would go to put this back together, this has to come out. So if you want to do a top screen, right, this has to come out. And then you also have to get this white cable out, but the white cable wasn't the problem. It was this guy. Like, you'd have to snake this underneath of here, and there are components. The CPU is under there as well, so you have to kind of navigate through. It's very difficult to see through here, but there are all kinds of little components under there, and this seriously has to like snake around to get under there. It was super frustrating and not something I looked forward to when I worked on these. We also have our little Wi-Fi card here. Now, you want to make sure this goes back in. A lot of people will forget and then it won't boot, but it does need this, it seems, to boot. So you want to make sure you have that back on there when you go to test it. Otherwise, you may just miss what is end up being a very simple reason why it doesn't boot and end up doing all kinds of crazy stuff to it. But a couple of screws here, and believe it or not, the motherboard is almost out. There's not a lot that holds this DS Lite board down other than just a few screws for the most part. Okay, so the board lifts up. We got to flip it around up here because we do have a cable that's plugged in. That's for the screen, of course. So this guy will come out after you unclip it. And we have now freed the bottom board. And this is good because this is the main part that we need for this project. The good news here with this screen, by the way, it looks really bad right there, but this appears to be a screen protector that was left on it. I think it's still kind of dirty underneath of this screen protector. Somewhat, yes, but I think that'll clean off, and I'm hoping that the screen itself looks good when we start it up. We'll see about that one. But we do have a very small clip right here. That is for our touch digitizer, so you want to unclip that very, very carefully. Those break super easily, and it is not fun when it does that, so be very careful with that one. The front screen for the LCD unplugs there, and then our board is free. And this is where we start to kind of take a look at how we are going to make this thing turn on without the need for that top screen. Because remember, it runs a self-check, so we have to pretty much trick this thing into turning on without that top screen. Now, this is where the soldering part comes in, and as the soldering iron warms up, I want to let you know how really this all works. So when it does run that self-check, it turns out, this is according to the Gameboy Macro website, it turns out that it doesn't necessarily look for the screen completely. It ends up looking for the screen's backlight, and the person running Gameboy Macro managed to figure out that if they strung up a bunch of LEDs, they could get the system to turn on without the need for that top screen. And it turns out that with a correct resistor on the board, just a little resistor between two dots, you can actually trick the system into thinking there is a top screen when there is not. And that's what we're about to do. So on the board down here, we have a couple of points. We have LED A2, and then we have LED C2. Those are the 2 points that we want to join with a resistor. You don't want to just bridge them with solder or wire. You actually want to use a resistor. It seems that 330 ohms is the value that a lot of people are going with. I've seen some people go with up to 750, but the guide that I saw mentioned 330, so I have a couple of resistors already laying around for 330, so I'm just gonna go with that. And while I'm on this side, I also noticed that there is a slight amount of corrosion there. It doesn't look like anything too major, so I'm hoping I can get away with this one, but I'm just gonna go ahead and just kind of scrub this board down a little bit, just with some rubbing alcohol just to clean it up really well. So what I did here was I pulled some solder on both points. It looks like they're a little further apart than the size of the resistor that I have here that I'm gonna use. So I might have to add a little extra solder just to make sure they connect. but it shouldn't be too much of a problem. All right, as you can see, we have our little resistor there connecting the points LED A2 and LED C2. And what that should end up doing is making the system believe that there is a top screen, which will allow it to now turn on. So actually what I can do is we can see the condition of this bottom screen now, because it did look like it may have got hit with some water, and we can try to power it on with just this plugged in, the Wi-Fi card, and then a battery, and see what we get. Okay, so I'm just gonna hold the battery here with my hand right there, just so we can get a quick power on to see if it works. And there we go. Okay, so it does power on now, no top screen. Touch screen is good. Let me see if I can hold that there while I grab something to touch it with. Touch screen also looks good. All right, so that, at least for now, looks fine. We still need to get the speakers out of the top, but really at this point, if I wanted to close it up, I guess I would be okay in the sense that if you just plug in headphones, you should get sound, but I guess we should at least put a speaker in just to get something out of it without headphones. All right, so this is where we move on to the top screen portion with the hinge. I would take these out and clean them while you can. Get like, what you should do is get like a Tupperware container, fill it with hot water and some soap, and literally just dunk these in there. And while you're taking this apart, like while you're taking this part apart, go ahead and just let them soak, like just next to you. And then after you get the speaker and all of that out, you can pick these up, and with a nice brush, you can just start cleaning them, and they should be almost brand new for the most part. You might have some wear on the front, of course, from where you were pressing the buttons, but it should at least be pretty clean at that point. So we have to unscrew a couple of screws over here, and we pretty much need to free this cable. Now, one thing I can see is that there is corrosion here, and I think the reason the top screen might not work, this could have been dropped in like a puddle. I've seen that happen where it hits like, you know, this part down, submerges in a puddle. The top part still kind of gets wet. I guess that'd be the bottom, just upside down. But if the top screen gets wet, I have seen that get to the point where it won't even power on. So we just need to undo a few screws here, and we can free this casing part from the top. So this is pretty much going to be the face of our Gameboy Macro. There are a lot of really cool things people do with this. They'll fill this in with like some putty or Bondo or whatnot. They'll kind of chop this off and do the same thing here, let it dry, sand it down, and then do all kinds of painting to it, which is really, really neat. I'm not going to do all of that because I know the average person probably won't, because as it is here, it's functional. So we're just gonna go with the least amount of work possible to get us to the point where it plays Game Boy Advance games. Now, in order to get this top shell open so we can get to the speakers, there are 4 screws under these little stickers, and you start peeling these up. They are Phillips head, you unscrew them there, and then we can actually slide the back casing off. Oh, also here's our hinge right here. That guy just kind of comes out. The way it worked with the DS Lite, it had this hinge on the side here, and it was usually set to, I think, 4 different positions. Of course, we had closed, slightly open, like kind of 90 degree almost, then fully opened. This hinge pretty much did all of that, and usually you wouldn't have to replace this, but I did have a few times where it broke or wore down to the point where it couldn't hold up at all. And that would, I guess, be kind of the case here, but a lot of times that had more to do with the plastics around it that would end up wearing down. So with your screws out, you actually slide this kind of up like this because it has some latches inside. And then you can actually lift this up, boom, there we go. And we can see everything here. So we have our speakers and our screen. The screen is kind of glued in almost. It has basically its own strip on the inside. Now we don't care about this screen, obviously, because we have some issues with it and it's not working, but usually you'd still want to be a little careful with it. Sometimes even have to put a little bit of heat on it to get it out of there. But you can see kind of the metal part that I'm talking about here, by the way. This was, to me, a fault with the design of the DS Lite. So you can see how we have this piece of metal right here. Now, that was there to provide extra support, right? So, like, obviously, we just have this plastic. They put this piece of metal here so that it wouldn't bend or break super easily, almost like its own little kind of skeleton there. But the problem is it would rub against, you can even see it a little bit there, it would rub against this this cable that kind of comes out and then it shoots down. What that ended up doing was rubbing against it as you open and close it, and eventually it would even cut into this, and I saw it all the time, and it was, yes, a problem with this DS Lite. So the way you would get this out of here, we have to get these 2 cables. So we have our Wi-Fi cable here, We won't need that anymore because we're not doing Wi-Fi with Game Boy Advance games. And then you have your microphone, which is this white cable. There we go. And then we have our screen here. And the way you would have to make this work, you would have to twist this guy around and kind of let it work through that way. Otherwise, you would damage your brand new screen that you bought to replace your old screen with. So it has to kind of do this little twisting motion to get it through. This is one of the reasons people did not like working on DS Lites or even DSIs or eventually, 3DSs. With the 3DS, you had 3 different cables that would have to spin through there. It was not fun. But we now have our screen, and the biggest thing we really want from this, the only thing we really want at this point, are one of the 2 speakers. And we're gonna go with a single speaker, so we're gonna remove this one, I guess, right here. It is soldered down, so we will of course need our soldering iron to remove that. Only 2 points, it's pretty straightforward, so you can pretty much hold on to your speaker here, and you just touch the points, and this guy will just pop right off, and we're good. So for this one, we're gonna go with SPR0 right here. It's a little point, and that's where we're going to put the positive end of our speaker. They have them divided up on the chart here, plus and minus. We're gonna have to ground it to the headphone jack. And this is to, if you want sound, of course, outside of just, I guess, that headphone jack. If you're fine with just plugging headphones in, I guess you don't really need to do this for the speakers, but I figure, like I said, we'll see how it all goes with having sound, see what the speaker can put out on its own with Game Boy Advance games. And we also have to figure out how we're gonna route this because the guide shows the speaker on the opposite side from where we're soldering it. So I'm thinking we could probably get away with soldering it here, running it behind that bottom screen. We'll see how that works out after I put it together. And then coming around here, going right next to where that touch ribbon cable plugs in, and then tuck any extras that I have underneath the game card slot. That's my plan anyway, so it can end up right where the guide has it, which is right there. So I went ahead and soldered the speaker down on the front side, and then I also grounded it to the headphone jack bottom there. And hopefully, with the speaker kind of flying all over the place, I can power this guy on with a test, and we get something out of that speaker that is at least audible, like it's loud enough. All right, and let's see how it sounds, just one speaker. I think that's pretty good. I think that's all right for what it is. I'm gonna let it hang down here for a second. I think that's pretty good for a single speaker there, just to kind of make this work with Game Boy Advance games. I think that'll sound all right. So I realize I'm trying to be very, very cheap about this as to how many parts outside of the system I bring into it. So I was trying to figure out how I was gonna put this speaker down and attach it to the back. You could use hot glue, sticky pads that you order, for example. I decided I'm gonna actually pull some of the tape that they used for the top screen. We'll cut a section out, and it should be enough just to hold the speaker in place when we go to put it together. And then of course the casing being on top of it will also help. There we go, just a little bit of sticky tape there. That should be enough to kind of hold this guy down when we go to screw it together. So we have our speaker hooked up, we got our screen, everything looks pretty good. We just gotta put it together now, so let's go and do that. I'm about to put the bottom on, and I want to stress this for anyone who has just recently taken a DS Lite apart for the first time and you're putting it back together. I'm gonna give you a tip that will save you a massive headache, because a lot of times when people are putting these back together for the first time, they don't realize that the switches, specifically the volume rocker and then the power switch, have to line up with the switches on the board, and they just go to jam it down and it actually breaks them. So if you look here, we have our power switch here, and then we have our volume switch. They are supposed to line up to these. Now the power switch is always gonna be in the down position, so you wanna make sure it's just down. If it's up, you'll end up breaking your power switch when you push down. And then your volume switch, I just leave it to maximum there on the left. So you can see it's all the way over. This is matching it. And then when you go to push it down, it will line up and then just pretty much click right in. Now, as I'm putting this together, I realized that the position of the speaker is actually crashing into the spot that we have our, for where your stylus would go. And I guess the reason for that, or the reason that they have it there, is because they assume you're not going to be using your stylus anymore. There's a lot of water damage here too. You're not going to be using your stylus anymore, so that you would just automatically remove this, and then your speaker would fit right in here, which is fine. To me, it's a shame that that would be the route to go, but I'm not really going to be using this as a DS any longer, so I guess it's not a massive deal anyway. I'm just going to go ahead and remove this and drop the speaker down there. Now, there was a word that you could use a switch speaker, which is smaller, and that's in that position. So that might be a route I would go, but I guess technically with this hole here and the speaker, you'd actually get some all right sound coming out of here, maybe a little bit of mesh or something over that, and you can actually leave that more or less as a speaker hole, essentially, for sound to come out of. But yeah, that seems to be anyway what they want you to do, is to remove all of that so that your speaker can sit right there. Well, it's all together now, so let's throw in some Game Boy games and check it out. So I have good old Pokemon Firered here, and what you want to do is, as soon as you get all of this done, you want to go into the settings. You want to make sure of two things. One, I would definitely say you want to make sure that the Game Boy Advanced is being played on the bottom screen, because we do not have access to that top screen at this point, even though the DS Lite thinks there's one there. There isn't. And then I would recommend, because I think it's cool to do this, auto mode, to where if you already have a Game Boy Advanced game in there, it'll just start it up. So now when we fire it up with a Game Boy Advanced game in here, it'll start up just like that, acting like a Game Boy Advanced. It will skip that main menu for the DS, and it'll just jump into your game. We have Pokemon Firered here. Let's see what the speaker sounds like in its placement. I think that's pretty good. I mean, we have access to one speaker. It's kind of down here coming out of the hole that we left where the stylus would go in. I think that's pretty good. The form factor itself is all right. It's interesting. I think it works how it is. We're kind of used to having, obviously, a top screen here that is just missing, but I think it fits in the hand pretty well. We do, of course, still have the Game Boy Advanced game itself still poking out of the bottom, but your hands don't really go there anyway, so that's not a big deal. Obviously, we've dealt with that with the DS Lite as it is. The screen, of course, it's a DS Lite screen. It looks great. And I think overall, this is really neat. Still have the headphone jack down there. You can plug in, volume slider right there. The DS cartridge slot is still available. So if you have like an R4 card, for example, and you want to pop it in and play ROMs off of it, you can still do that. It'll just have to know that you're only having access to the bottom screen. And I believe the R4 card has options for like mostly just bottom screen use, especially for any Game Boy Advanced games you're trying to play. You know what? I like it. And in fact, if we compare it to the Game Boy Micro, you can kind of get the idea why it's called a Game Boy Macro, because it really does look like just a bigger Game Boy Micro. I mean, seriously, it looks very, very similar. The only real differences, I guess, is that obviously it still has a DS Lite card slot. It's a little larger, and the charge port's a bit different and off to the side. But I like this idea. I think this is really neat. And of course, you could do all kinds of stuff beyond what we've done here. This is like the bare minimum. I mean, seriously, I pulled that resistor off of a dead Super Nintendo game board. Like, I didn't even order the resistor. So, yeah, I went a little out there when it comes to not having to order much of anything, but you can play around with the case. People, like I said, shave these all off, redo kind of the casing with some Bondo and putty and sand it down and then paint it. Tons of customizable things you can do with this. It's just overall a really neat project. But let me know what you guys think about the Game Boy Macro, and if you're thinking about making one, I'll leave a link down below to the site that has kind of the written instructions, and you can kind of look around at some of the other really cool things that they've been able to do on that site for this project. It's just a neat thing. I think if you have a DS Lite that is just broken anyway and it's sitting around, and you kind of know it's the top screen that got smashed or damaged, or maybe the system even had some water damage like this one, sometimes just cleaning the board will fix it, by the way, but those ribbon cables will get damaged, especially the ones that go through the hinge here, and a lot of times removing that and doing this will at least give you a little Game Boy Macro that you can play advanced games on. Pretty neat. Let me know, guys, what you think about this down below. Once again, thanks to Manji with the Command Shell for sponsoring the video. Make sure you guys like the video on the way out if you enjoyed it, dislike it if not, and I'll see you next time.